How's everybody doing today? Welcome to our webinar this week on how to get a record deal. Um, Never was easy, still isn't, but we're going to give you a lot of heads up and advice. It's Jim Norris talking. I'm the president of NWC, the publisher of Canadian Musician, and I do a bunch of other things in my spare time. So welcome and make some notes. So first off, we're going to get acquainted a little bit. So first off, I just want to know where you are right at this minute, or where you live, I guess is probably better. So that should be the poll in front of you. So all you have to do is fill in wherever you are or wherever you live. It's never too much of a surprise, the results of these. They kind of go by population. Looks like we have a couple in the United States. Okay, people are still coming in, but we'll go on with this. So there's the results. Again, mostly Ontario, of course, and our friends in Quebec. Actually, there's more from Eastern Canada than Quebec. That's great. Okay. So where are we here? We'll look it over there. So second thing is we just want to know who you are, what you do. I just put like the prime one in here. Obviously, some of you are more than one of these things. Probably lots of musicians. Again, not too many surprises, but aside from musicians, some industry folks. So a good chunk of musicians, 71%, some managers, producers, one entertainment lawyer. I wonder who that could be. Surprise, surprise. It reminds me of a joke, but I won't tell it. So, okay, that's good. So why are we doing this webinar? One of the things I guess that serious musicians aspire to is to get a record out there. A number of ways of doing it, of course, but in many cases, and certainly the people here are aspiring to get a record deal with a record company. So that's what we're going to talk about here. Not easy, never was, probably harder than it ever was, I would have to say. I guess Fraser can attest to that when we get to him. But that's why we're doing it, give you the little bit of information, and so you can develop a plan. That's the important thing. You can use the chat all the way through at the bottom, so you can chat with individuals or just send your name. If you want people to contact you and you're not shy, you can stick your email address in there. There will be a recording. There is a recording being made. I actually remember to push the button this time. And when this is over, it will be posted. You'll get an email at 4 o'clock today. Actually, no, that's a different email. You'll get an email tomorrow telling you where the recording is. So if you want to listen to it later or pass it on to somebody who didn't make it today. We also have a resources page. That's the email that you'll get at 4 o'clock. And it has some websites, the LinkedIn addresses of our speakers. And I suggest strongly that you go through and Google and look in all the various places to look at Fraser and Burt's accomplishments. It took my breath away actually just getting back to it today. When you see all the different things that these guys have done, it's kind of scary. So you're in very good company today. Once we're done talking to Fraser and Burt, we're going to separate into breakout rooms. It's not as scary as it sounds. So I'll open up the rooms. You can choose which one you want to be in, and they're very creatively named. One is named Fraser Hill, the other's named Bertgadaro. And you don't have to stay in there for some reason. If you want to move on, or if you want to go back and forth, you can do that as well. So you just have to go in there, indicate which room you want to be in. The main thing is that Fraser and Burt have to choose the right rooms, or you'll really get a lot of the musicians confused. So you don't want to do that. Then the other important thing, and the part that people forget to do, is the follow-up. That's important. You go out, you gather information, you read books, you go to seminars, you go to Canadian Music Week, and you do all these things to stuff all this information in your brain. But the important thing is, what are you going to do? Tomorrow morning when you get up, you should be able to write a list of 3 or 4 things that you're going to do that you weren't doing before. And this is where most people fail. They just file it all in there, they get up, and 3 days later, everything's the same as it was before, and they're not moving in any better direction. So the key is, don't write a list of 50 things, because it's not going to happen. 3 is probably plenty that you're going to do different. It might be some of the to-dos that we're going to talk about here. Okay, but that's important with anything. You don't have to wait for New Year's to do your resolutions. That's a good one. Resolutions. You want to be doing that probably every week, I would say. So, and the time is now, right? The time is always now, but the pandemic is more or less over. We shouldn't be frozen anymore. For a while there, we certainly were. Both live and recorded music is expanding. Live music is booming, really, and certainly the types of recorded music is just growing all the time. The number of ways that the audience or your fans can listen to your music is growing all the time. The downside, I guess you could call it, is there's lots of competition for all this. So that's something you have to be aware of, doesn't matter what you're doing, but certainly if you're going to try and get a record deal, there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of people trying to do the same thing. There's a lot of people applying for grants. So you have to say to yourself, well, I just have to do it better, more aggressively, more often than everybody else. That's important. So here's a little to-do list for you. So make sure you have great songs. And without that, the rest of it doesn't really matter too much. And it might be that some are other people's material, and that's not a terrible thing, but they have to be great songs, because without that, the rest of it isn't going to work. They have to be performed extremely well. Okay. So if you put those first 2 things together, you kind of have to make sure you don't suck. I think that's what it comes down to. Build your audience. You should always be doing that, and that's going to help you get the attention of an A&R person, but it's also going to make your deal with the record company more appealing.
Papai quer aprender. Ele que fechou aqui a reunião. Papai já não consegue ver agora.
Sorry,
Filho, não pode assim.
if we can hold the speaking until later, please. There we go. Okay, I don't know who that was. I think that's somebody that didn't get a record deal, I guess. So yeah, build your audience. Let's go back here. There we go again. Okay, yes, getting ahead of myself here. There we go. So yeah, you should always be building your audience. It makes your ability to get the attention of the right people. If you've got a Facebook page with 27 followers and they've all got the same last name as you, that kind of shows that things aren't going so well. So you want to build that. And it also means that if you do get signed, the record company's got a bit of a head start. So there's an audience there. There's people that actually like the band, go out and see them live. You also want to make sure that your act is recording friendly. And what I mean by that is that at some point in this process, you're going to have to go in and record something. So make sure you know something about it and do it well, because all of the studios charge by the hour. So nobody wants somebody to go in there and spend months working on one song. So, spend some time doing that. And then when you've done the first four of things to a suitable level, you need to start making connection with the record companies. Okay. So Fraser, I know he's here, and I've been looking at his history. It's kind of daunting, actually. For a guy who's only 29, it's quite incredible.
Wise guy.
So I went back as far as I could, as far as I could find. And I think there's a good lesson in there as well, that when I looked for Fraser, he wasn't hard to find. That's a good thing for yourself. If somebody Googles your name or the name of your act and they don't find anything, it's kind of not a good sign. So I found a bunch of production and engineering going back, I would have to say, into the olden days. I've got Tom Cochran in there, and Red Rider, quite a few acts from years ago. Then 21 years in A&R with EMI and Universal. That's a long time. That's a lot of artists signed. And The Launch, very popular TV show. He was involved in choosing the talent for that. And then most recently, he has his own A&R consulting firm, which is great. So, if you want to know more about that specifically, I would suggest that you send Fraser a chat and just let him know that you might be interested in his services. So first off, I have some questions for Fraser first. We could assume everybody knows, but just let us know what an A&R director does. What's the meaning of the word, and what do they do for a living?
Hello, everyone. Great to kind of see everybody. And hello, Jim and Burt. Yeah, A&R is artist and repertoire. It's a term that was used well back into the earliest beginnings of recording. Traditionally, artist and repertoire individual was somebody who was an orchestrator, a composer, a musician, and was attached to a label. Back in the 50s, there were numerous labels. A lot of them were independently owned, or there was the big 5 or 6 at that time. And those individuals came into the business from the musician side of it, and production, sort of a combination of both. As you moved into the late 70s, like the late 60s, 70s, that's where it started. A&R started to open up into all kinds of people coming into A&R, from being a journalist to a radio person to a promoter. And it just opened, it was a lot wider. So a lot more people got involved. And so you had less of the traditional musician composer side, and you had people that had different kinds of skill sets to come in that could spot talent. So that's a long answer to what A&R is, but that gives you the history of where it started and where we are now.
Excellent. And then, going back in the olden days, as you mentioned, a lot of it was connecting the artist with composers and songwriters, because there's I think in the States especially, that it works a little different than here, but there's a lot of artists that possibly didn't have their own music, and the A&R person would put that together as well, in comparison to a band that has all their own original material.
That's correct. Yeah, in the early days, that they would seek out a good voice like Sinatra, and all that in the 50s ilk. And the artists would seek out that producer, and he could find the songs and marry the two together and move on. It wasn't until you got into the late 60s where the bands and the folk movement, Dylan and Lightfoot and everybody started writing their own material. That's when it became where the A&R shifted a little bit from being a traditional composers and producers and musicians, and it became a wider net of people looking for talent.
Excellent. So when you were an A&R director all those years, and you had to figure out who to sign, because obviously there's a lot of financial responsibility on your shoulders as an A&R person. You can only make so many mistakes, and then you're looking for a job at Dairy Queen or something different. So I would just wonder if you had like a checklist, or if you had something that said, this is how I figure out, who should apply, or, who should I bother looking at to sign?
Well, for me, because I come back, my background is production, so I come out of producing. I mean, I started as an assistant with Anne Murray and worked my way up. So as Jim said, I pretty well started in the 78, 79 era as an assistant, just making coffee and setting up the mics, and then worked my way up. So I come from looking at A&R from a little more of a production side. So I look at it as to, if something's generating interest, how do I go about making that record? How can I make that connect with an audience? And then even before that, I'm looking at an artist to see if it can work its way through the building. Can it come through the front door and get through all the maze and the myriad of people that you have to be involved with to put out the record? So those are kind of my collective checklist. So I look at it from, can I produce a really solid piece of work? Does the artist have more than one song? Do they have 10 songs? Am I looking at a artist development situation? Am I looking at a situation that is fit well and just needs to be tidied up a bit? And then the budgets attached to those decisions reflect what the material is and the style of music.
Excellent. And what about the process, I guess, and how you find the music? I think that's obviously changed a bit, but for you, where did it come from? Did you go out looking for artists, or did they come to you, or both? Or were they showcasing it somewhere like Canadian Music Week? Like, what are the options, and how much has that changed over the last 20 years?
Well, yeah, for initially, sort of when I started, because I cross a lot of technology and a lot of change. So, initially when I was doing it, demos would come in cassette form, and you'd go through, you'd spend days going through cassettes and going through that. The business is quite a bit different. Even 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it's so different from what it was in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. But fundamentally, every person, everything is a tip. A lawyer is a tip, your friend's a tip, the promoter, the doorman, the engineer, the assistant, the producer, the composer, someone's girlfriend. You wouldn't believe the number of things that I've come across over the years where people have mentioned one thing or another, and I've gone after it. So that hasn't changed. Word of mouth from known sources, Jim. People that you trust, and that's initially what gets things going on some acts. But other things are, me hunting the internet, kick the door wide open so I could hunt through the internet and going through all that. And I'd having a couple assistants working through the internet, listening to things. I would, I'd schedule meetings with agents across, a year, and have drop in and see agents because they're usually the first line of musicians and managers reaching out to get gigs. And it's kind of how I found the Northern Pikes. I hooked up with an agent and was trying to find music to work on as a producer, and I went on to co-produce and manage and get those guys signed to Virgin. So that's how it started. It hasn't really changed. It's just different how it is today. It's online, and Facebook and all the social networks are platforms to find things.
And how important is it the act's live history, I guess, and their, how well they play live? How important is that in you making a decision? Do you generally see them live before you'd have somebody signed?
Because of my background, yes, I want to see them live. I want to see if it's, if it walks and talks and it is what it is. Because I also want to get, this is me. Not everybody's the same as me, because you understand in A&R, everybody works differently. They have their different things that resonates with them. For me, I want to see it live. I want to be able to kick the tires. I want to know that I can work with them on a personal level and on a professional level, making the music. So that's kind of where I come from it. Yes, there are things that come in to me, even now that I'm consulting, where the music is really great and it's produced really well, because everybody has the ability to do that today. But I still want to go out and see if that is actually the singer, if they actually are, because I've got to be able to put my weight behind it and push it through the whole process of putting out a record in a record company scenario.
Excellent. And what about the level of success that they're at before they see you? In other words, the success that they may have had selling records on their own or on streaming platforms or social media, that type of thing. How important is that, especially nowadays?
It's really important, Jim. I mean, you have to have, in today's world, and the record companies, they want a lot more stuff developed further down the road than before. Certainly, traditionally, the artist development, more risks were being able, people were interested in risking more. They were willing to take a chance. If you had one song, a couple of songs that were resonating, but you needed some work on it, labels would, if they felt everything was there, where management was good, they had an agent, they're willing to take a shot on it. But today, it's a lot different. It really depends on the label that you are thinking you want to go after. But there's a lot of labels now are looking for things that are way more established, solid numbers across your socials. Do you have an identity on Spotify and Amazon? Do you understand who you are? Those kind of things.
Excellent. And what's the best way for a musician, let's say, to approach the A&R people at a record company? Is there something that's better than others? Or let's say they feel they're ready to sign with a major label or even an indie label. What's the best process for them to get the attention of the A&R person?
You need to have, the best way is, as most A&Rs will, and people in the business, they're in a position to sign or put money behind an act. They will say that, we will find you. If you're creating the heat, we will find you.
Right.
And so you've got that out there where everybody is constantly looking. And for someone reaching out to an A&R person, do your research. recognize who, understand who you're going after. If you're a country artist, don't go after Epitaph. If you're, a punk act, go after the right label and the right lane. That makes life a lot easier. And that right away establishes an understanding between you and the A&R person, that you understand where you think your music fits. Because you got to understand that getting a record deal is the beginning for some people, and the hard work comes right from the moment of the signing, because you're all kind of collectively landing in one spot, and then you've got to figure out where you're going to go. So the more you have accomplished and done, and you can present that to the A&R person, the more attractive you are as a signable entity.
Excellent. So let's assume that Act X has gone through all of that and actually looking at getting signed with a label. At this point, they're going to come in contact with an entertainment lawyer. And so we have Burt Gidaro with us today, and I'd say he's not a normal lawyer. I don't know if he's been called that before, but I'd have to look at his background, and it's pretty interesting. He's with a company that's different, Edwards Creative Law, very much specializes in entertainment law. So you're not going with your brother Ruben, who once did a deal on a condo in Etobicoke. And because I've seen people do that, and the band says, "Oh yeah, Irving, he's a lawyer. He just graduated from New York last month." So the first thing is you have to have somebody that deals in these things all the time, and there's not that many. And many times they're at a general firm, and they're the one entertainment guy that looks different than the lawyers in their suits and that. But Edwards Creative Law is interesting because that's all they do. They just do creative law. So that's pretty cool. And then if you look up Burt's bio, you'll see that he's worked in business development at Universal Music and at EMI, worked in legal affairs, a lot of different things. When did your law degree come in all of this?
So I graduated from law school in 1999. I was called to the bar after articling in Ontario, which is like an antiquated kind of apprenticeship that you have to do before you're able to practice law. But I was technically called to the bar in 2001.
Okay.
Yeah, and started doing more normal law, to use your word, initially. But it was still had a focus on intellectual property and things to do with creativity, whether or not it was like I was doing purely creative stuff at the time. But there's always that interest because of my my background as a musician and somebody who had gone to university and done an undergrad in music.
Yeah, and that part too, I know, and just from talking to you earlier today, that you are a working musician as well, which means you understand.
I sometimes get paid to do stuff, but I wouldn't call myself. I have a day job for sure.
Well, you're working. It doesn't mean you get paid. You just work, right? So, and you're a keyboard player.
Yeah,
Cool. Well, I think that's good too, because obviously you have some empathy for your clients if you're out there playing and understanding what it's like. Whereas if you've never done that that makes it a little bit different. So I think it's important to stress that because there's been lots of cases, but for any artist of any kind, before you enter into an agreement, you have to talk to a lawyer. I mean, you just it's if you're going to sign with a record label, as an example, they're going to have a lawyer. They're not going to. In many cases, they have full-time lawyers that work there. So you don't want to be going in and negotiating with a lawyer who knows what they're doing and you don't. And that's certainly my experience anyway, that it's important to have a lawyer and make sure it's the right lawyer. So how does an artist that's looking at signing, how do they find a lawyer and the right lawyer?
Right. Well, good question. I mean, the same way you might find an artist, which is you look on the internet and you try and get tips from people that you know in the business too, someone that you and they'll provide you with a name that you can trust. You can call the law society too, but typically their take on things is whether or not you've had a history of a disciplinary history or something. I really think it's important if you have a manager or an agent, you can talk to those folks and they will often point you in the right direction because they've worked with lawyers and they know them.
And if you're looking for an entertainment lawyer, it's not like there's thousands of them. I mean, even in Canada, that you can almost count them on your fingers, the ones that are busy and doing all the work. So it's, at least you're not going through hundreds and hundreds of lawyers, because there aren't that
That's true.
that specialize in entertainment law. So you're going to come down to the point here. We've gone this far. You've the A&R dude has signed you, and it's time to look at the contract. So I just want to know a little bit more, Burt. What are in typical contracts, if there's any such thing anymore nowadays? They've when I was in the band, it was a long time ago, like 50 years ago. So they were a lot simpler in terms of what the potential income was, and all the different things. But just typically, aside from the legal speak, what would be in a typical recording contract for an artist with, let's say, a major label?
Yeah, so typically with a major label, the first thing they're going to want to do is own the master recordings, or the sound recordings that you produce. And they would have an obligation to pay you for any sort of revenue that came in from them, but at the end of the day, it would be theirs. If you have more leverage there, and it depends on the genre too. You're seeing if it's very competitive for an artist, like a hip hop artist, often you'll find that it's a license deal. Like they'll have it for a period of years, and then the masters can end up reverting to the artist. But you have to, it has to be competitive, meaning there has to be a lot of interest in you, and the label that's one way of sweetening the deal for you, is that at the end of the day, you own the sound recording. And you'll probably do a deal with that same label if they've been doing a good job, but the economic terms will change in your favor at that point too. So that's one thing that you'll typically find in a major label deal. You'll also find that there's typically more money involved in a major label deal. Your recording budgets are going to be healthier than, say, if you sign with an indie artist, just because that's it's to be expected. You're also going to get an in-pocket advance as an artist, and those are going to be healthier than, say, with most indie labels. And the model in which they pay you is different too, right? If you sign up with an indie, you can typically expect that they'll do what's called a net 50-50 deal, meaning they get to deduct all their costs of recording, marketing, etc., and then they split any profit with the artist 50-50 at that point. And that's not the case with major label deals. Typically, there's a royalty involved. Somewhere in the neighborhood of, depending 15 to 22%. And again, that all depends on how much leverage you have, how sought after you are. And that's how you end up getting paid. And there's typically, you would have to recoup any advances. That's another sort of different concept, but it's basically, I don't like to call it this, but advances are kind of they're just that. They're an advance. They're not really a loan. You get paid in advance for what would be sales. And then the record company gets to recoup the amount that they've paid you from sales until they're fully paid back that. But it's not a loan in that, they're not securing it against your car or anything. Nobody's going to repossess your car. So it's more of an investment type of model. And then the other thing that you want to think about too is that record labels, pretty much all record deals, or at least on both sides, indie and major label, will have options for various albums. They'll typically commit to the first album, and then they'll have a number of options after that to which they can trigger, and you would need to record another album. They need to pay you advances and the recording fees, etc. But at their option, they could say, okay, well, here's your notice. And you're going to record another album for us. And the more options that they have, the longer the deal lasts, right? So typically, if I'm negotiating on behalf of an artist, I'm going to want less options, although I wouldn't say not no options. Like you want to be involved with the record label. You want them to be incentivized and to have a piece of your future, right? If they know they have that, they're typically going to work harder for you. It's less likely, and this isn't, I'm not generalizing here, but it's less likely that they're going to knock it out of the park from a marketing perspective or an A&R perspective if they think they're going to lose you after this next coming album. So those are kind of the main features of a major label deal: advances, royalties, release commitments, typically within Canada, and options. Like those are the sorts of things that you can end up seeing in any sort of deal for you.
Right. What a lot of artists don't recognize in many cases is the fact that the record company has to make money and they have to get their expenses, and that some artists get to what they feel is a pretty decent level of success, but they haven't seen any money, and they haven't figured the math out yet. They might be a gold if they're actually selling records, and they haven't seen a penny because it takes fairly high level, especially if there's been a lot spent on the recording and other expenses, videos and all the other things. So I think a lot of times the artist doesn't understand that they just sign it, great, we got a deal, we're all going to be rich, and then they don't see any money for a long time. So it's important that, and I guess that's one of having your own good lawyer. They can explain that to you, that this is the way this is going to work. So that they just don't sign it and hope that all the money comes pouring in.
Right. Well, and to your point, it's like, older deals, and I dealt with them too, even though I didn't do the deals predated me. It's like you would see the recording budgets used to be huge. And the advances to the artists were a lot bigger too. It was just part of the business. Recording cost a lot more money at the time too. So it made sense. And so 3 or 4 albums in, the record label has spent a lot of money that they're looking to recoup. And so that debit balance, the shortfall between what the artist, the time before the artist can get paid, it's gone up a lot. And you would find legacy artists saying, what happened? Why am I not getting paid like it? I made you guys a ton of money. And you go back and do the accounting, there's an audit, and it's like, yeah, we also spent $400,000 on a video in 1994, which no one would ever do now.
Right.
You just spent a lot more money at the time. And what's happening too, like in the last little while, what the record labels have done is they've forgiven a lot of debit balances of those legacy artists, just because they felt like, let's face it, it was a good press release too, but also it's the fair thing to do, because an artist being recouped doesn't mean that's when the record label starts making money. The record label starts making money long before that. They break even long before the artist is recouped. It's just that's a way of delaying their payments out to the artist. Right. So you'll see, I think Universal made an announcement that any artist that was that they had signed more than or that they had put their product out more than 20 years ago, they were going to forgive the debit balance on it, just because that's money that they've written off anyway, and they're probably, they're likely profitable. If you went a couple of albums with them, they were profitable in the first place.
Right. And is that something that they would aggressively let the artist know, or is it just something that's happened, and if the artist knows, good, and if not, well?
I think it's 20. I checked in for an artist of mine just in terms of one of those things. It wasn't that. It was kind of like some press announcement where a certain record label had, sold its shares in Spotify and made a press release, or they had a press release saying, look, we're going to pay pro rata our artists, our share of that, because we were able to, negotiate those shares on their backs a bit, right? Like our repertoire is the reason that Spotify gave us shares.
Right.
So, and it did happen. They actually did it. So they put their money where their mouth was.
Well,
I would say, and maybe we'll switch gears here for a second too, because
sure.
with major record label deals are, what I think the major labels are really good at is marketing and promoting someone, right? That is increasingly what they're becoming, is marketing companies that, and marketing and sales companies that push their artists and find, they get insights, all kinds of things in terms of audience mapping. That's really where their expertise is. But the economics of the deal, we've also gotten to a point where your barrier to entry as an artist and to make good quality recording, either at home or in your own studio, is very low. The bar to entry now is low in terms of costs. So you have a more direct line to the market. And that means that you have to ask yourself, even if you are getting interest from a major label, like you have to see what they're going to do for you, and whether or not at the end of the day it's worth you giving up your share, like, because you're going to give up part of your share in order to get on the major label train, whether what they're doing is worth it or not. And so it's maybe not always the right idea, depending on the artist, to sign with a major label. There might be, and depends on the temperament of the artist too, right? An artist, if you have, like, artists are entrepreneurs, and they have to be these days. So if you're like an artist and not necessarily an entrepreneur, it's good to find somebody, whether it's a major label or not, who has that business side and will nurture you and take, bring you in on things as an artist, but will take care of the entrepreneurial side of things. And then there are certain artists that just, like, they kind of have it all, and they're rare that way, but they have both sides of it. And so they could, they have the stomach and the temperament and the aptitudes to go out and be more entrepreneurial and potentially, make more money for themselves, if that's the end goal, than they would in the major label system, and they'll have more control, more creative control over things too, right? So that's kind of, I'm not dissing either side of these. There's advantages to being on a major label. There's advantages to being on an independent label, and there are advantages to maybe being your own label, depending on what you do. Like, we have a number of producer clients who are artists as well, and so they're basically their own producer, label, and artist, and they start getting traction and having success that way. Maybe that leads to a major label deal, or maybe they don't like the major label model. It's there's a lot of variation these days.
That's really good advice for sure.